You grabbed me. You do not grab me. That is what I said before everything spiraled. Me, female, 16 years old, shaking like a cheap lamp, breath visible in the cold air of the front porch. My stepmom's new boyfriend had his hand on my wrist like it belonged to him. He laughed the way men laugh when they think they own a room. My voice didn't sound like mine. I could feel the hate in it, like gasoline waiting for a match. This whole thing began a year after my father went away. Not a sentence like a few years. He was taken in cuffs, given 25 to life for something no one in our neighborhood wanted to talk about. After that, the house changed the way neighborhoods change after a storm, patched up, quiet, and suddenly full of strangers. My stepmom, my mother's second name now, stopped pretending she cared. She put on satin dresses, kept longer hours, and when I asked to help with dinner, she just said, "You're old enough to handle the chores." Her voice was the same as the TV's infomercials, polished and impossible to reach. When she brought Paul over, she said, "You can trust him." I didn't trust anything that smelled like new cologne and bad intentions. I stood in the empty hallway, barefoot on cold wood, listening to his shoes squeak like a cartoon villain entering the scene. He stared at our photos on the wall, at the one of Dad at a barbecue with his arm around me when I was 7, and smirked. "So this is the little," he used a word that made my chest twist, "you were talking about." He reached like he was trying to pull a Pokemon card out of a sealed pack, casual, entitled. I asked if he needed anything. He grabbed my arm and twisted it. Pain shot up like electricity. I remember the smell of hot grease from the kitchen and the tinny ringtone of some pop song playing in the living room. Instinct took over. I kneed him in the shin. He doubled like a badly written scarecrow, cursing and grabbing at his leg. My stepmom snatched my wrist so hard I tasted metal and shoved me out the front door. The night hit me like a wave, the scent of wet pavement, distant tires, the porch light buzzing. She slapped me twice, right across my face, and said, loud enough for the neighbors, "Your father did this to you. Now you're nothing but a problem." I walked because I did not know what else to do. 3 blocks to the station that felt like 10 miles, my fingers going numb, the cold crawling through my sleeves. Should I have fought back or stayed quiet? That question kept spooling through my head, half rage and half prayer. The cop at the desk looked like someone who had seen too many stories and none he trusted. I remember his jacket smelling like coffee and bleach. He didn't laugh. He listened, and that was all I needed him to do. He drove me home in his cruiser because the station was the only place that felt like it would let me breathe. When we got there, the blue light cutting across the living room made the house smaller, like a stage set. Paul was behind the couch, rubbing his shin like an injured actor. My stepmom's lipstick was smudged, and her laugh was gone. The officer took my statement, and for reasons I would later understand in courtroom diagrams and whispered visits to social workers, both of them were let out in handcuffs. I sat on the curb with frost nibbling at my ears and thought, I did not mean to be the thunder that ended their calm. Then the officer asked if I had anywhere to go. He offered his couch for a few nights, like a bandage offered by someone who does not bleed the same way. In the back of my mind, a million arguments from Reddit threads and whispered lectures split apart and reassembled into one raw, pulsing thing. What would you have done in my place? I was tired, so tired, but I had a small, fierce pride that felt like a stubborn ember. The neighbors were whispering on porches, their breath making little clouds in the porch light. My phone had 1 bar. My backpack had math homework and the smell of last week's cafeteria pizza. I thought about staying, thought about leaving, thought about pressing charges, which sounded like a word from a grown-up movie where people always got justice. The officer's offer to take me in, It felt like hope and a complicity all at once. But the house was a pressure cooker of things unspoken. When the woman from Child Protective Services arrived the next morning, her coat smelled like dryer sheets and bureaucracy. People started to say the line I heard most, "We'll have to investigate." I sat in the living room, where the couch still sagged, and wondered if investigate was going to bring them back together or tear them apart. Would you confront a parent the way I did? At night, I replayed the moment Paul grabbed me. I did not like feeling like prey on the sidewalk, where the streetlight hummed and the smell of cigarettes floated by. Maybe people would call me dramatic. Maybe they would say kids lie for attention, that the details were too neat, too cinematic. But every bruise told a version of truth. I pulled my sleeves over my hands like a shield and kept thinking about trust. Who gets it, who earns it, and who steals it? Do you think I should have trusted them less? A week later, my stepmom and Paul were in court. The judge looked like he'd been carved from mahogany, stern, final. I sat across from them behind a table that smelled of old paper, and a court reporter clicked her keyboard like a metronome. The prosecutor asked me to repeat things I had already said 1,000 times. Each repetition felt like picking a scab, but I did it. The defense tried to paint me as a rebellious child with a grudge. Words like history and instability floated around me. I watched my stepmom's eyes for any flicker of softness, any apology, and found only a thin film of anger and the faint metallic taste of denial. I had allies too. The officer who had driven me there had contacted a teacher from school. Mrs. Lang, my biology teacher, whose classroom smelled of old coffee and plant soil, took me to the school counselor. She wrote a note, and her face crumpled in a way that felt like loyalty. The community started to split. Some neighbors came forward, others crossed the street. Social media started to hum with rumors that sounded like static, but also like support. A girl on the internet is often louder than a grown man in a living room. The jury of the town began to assemble in whispers. In the cafeteria that week, someone left a paper crane on my tray with "You did the right thing" scrawled across it. The paper smelled faintly of cafeteria glue and old pizza. I kept it. The world had not yet decided how to treat me, as an angry child, a heroic teenager, or a troublemaker who had shattered a house. I kept asking myself, in the bathroom where the tiles smelled like bleach and lemon, should I have fought back or stayed quiet? That night, I got a text from a number I did not recognize. He's being loud. He's saying he's changing his story. My heart turned into a stone and then into a bird. The next day, the defense called a witness, Paul's neighbor, a man named Eddie, who said he heard us arguing, but not the way I described it. The courtroom smelled like stale coffee and toner as the cross-examination began. The clock on the wall ticked like a time bomb. I realized, with the chilling clarity of someone who has been pushed into a corner, that truth alone might not be enough. I had prepared myself for the usual, victim blaming, whispers, the slow sinking of credibility, but I was not ready for the twist that hit the quarter mark like a truck. The defense produced a video. It was grainy, phone quality, taken from the street outside. It showed my stepmom and Paul arguing, yes, and me on the porch screaming, yes. But then there was a second angle, a clip from inside the house, a hallway camera I had never known existed. It showed Paul entering the living room, but not grabbing me. In the clip, he merely reached toward the couch and then staggered as I swung my knee. The room went silent, but for the clicking of the court reporter. My chest felt like an accordion being squeezed. "This video changes things," the defense attorney said, and the word "changes" was a guillotine. I felt suddenly very small, like a note in a song that had been cut off mid-phrase. How do you explain the space between what you felt and what a camera records? The prosecutor's face hardened. My own memory felt like a film strip with one frame missing. Outside the courthouse, the air smelled like exhaust and freedom. A handful of people who had once called me brave now kept their heads down. The officer who had believed me avoided my eyes. The social worker said, quietly, "We have to look at everything." My stomach turned. Had I misread him? Had my fear and my past braided together into a story that made sense only to me? And then, testimony from the medical examiner came in. Paul had torn ligaments in his leg, consistent with a kick delivered with force. The defendant's limp was not theater. Courtroom dynamics shifted like tectonic plates. People changed sides as if changing a team at halftime. My stepmom's face, which had been a mask, cracked for a second. I realized the story was no longer a simple binary, right or wrong, but a messy braid of memory, motive, desperation, and survival. I had to hold my ground against the smear campaign that would argue I was an angry child with a vendetta against my mother's new happiness. After the video twist, legal counsel from Child Protective Services sat me down in a room that smelled like lemon cleaner. "You did the right thing to defend yourself," the counselor said, and then added, hesitant, "But remember, the courtroom is not the town square." My throat closed. I thought of the officer's couch, of Mrs. Lang's sticky note support, of the paper crane. I was fighting for something bigger than a bruise, for the right to walk down my own hallway without being reached for like merchandise. Then, just when I thought the scale would tip one way forever, a witness nobody expected stepped forward. Paul's sister, a quiet woman with paint under her fingernails and a voice like gravel, came in and told the court something that severed the easy narrative into two. She said she had seen Paul drunk and belligerent at a party months before, and had warned my stepmom. She said he had a temper that lived under the surface like mold in a shower. The defense frowned. The prosecution brightened. The room shifted again. I felt like a puppet whose strings were being pulled by strangers, but each new pull revealed a layer I had not known. As the trial peeled open more of their life, eviction notices, small debts, whispers of threats, I understood that this was not simply about one night and one knee. It was about years of choices, about how people with histories keep making the same moves until someone stops them. The mid-trial twist was not a plot device. It was the revelation that no one's story is neat. My decision to strike back had opened a box that contained more than just guilt or exoneration. It held a history of quiet violence and neglect. The week stretched on. I learned about motions and exhibits and the way a litigant's face can look like a mask in the witness stand. My stepmom cried once in court, not the cinematic racking sob, but a small, composited thing that seemed rehearsed. Paul kept to himself, favoring his leg, and mumbled what might have been apologies or rehearsed lines. In the cafeteria, the paper cranes multiplied. People chose sides like they were tasting a bitter candy and deciding if they liked it. I began to realize the courtroom was not a place where truth lived alone. It was a place where truth was weighed against perception, against other people's notes and cameras and ready-made narratives. Every memory I had, the twist of his hand, the smell of grease, the porch light buzzing, had to compete with recorded angles and witness accounts. I felt like an artist torn between two canvases. Do you think I should have trusted them less? One night, I sat on the roof of the school auditorium, the tar under my palms smelling faintly of old concerts and gum. The town looked like a scattering of lanterns, and I let myself think of small victories. Getting my math grade back up, Mrs. Lang's notes, a neighbor who dropped homemade bread on my porch. I also thought about revenge, because it's human to want to hiss when someone hurts you. Would you have defended me or them? I wondered aloud to the empty sky, and the echo came back uncertain. The final weeks of the trial moved like a slow tide, pulling up secrets I didn't know I needed to see. Witnesses who had never thought to speak suddenly remembered things. Receipts and text messages became exhibits. A neighbor's nighttime recording captured a muffled argument. At one point, the judge asked for a recess after spending 2 hours listening to testimony that bled into questions of parental neglect, adult accountability, and the rights of a minor. I sat in the hallway with a cup of vending machine coffee that tasted like burnt hope. When the verdict finally came, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. I watched my stepmom's face like it was a map I had to read. Paul's jaw clenched. The bailiff's shoes squeaked. The judge's voice was a slow, decisive drum. They were found guilty of assault and neglect. Paul received a sentence that included community time and mandated anger management classes, but also a short jail stint for the assault on a minor, a detail that made my stomach flip because the real world's punishments are rarely as clean as we want them to be. My stepmom received a mix of probation and parenting classes with supervised visitation to ensure my safety. The room erupted into quiet applause from strangers who had once been strangers and now felt like witnesses. But the victory was not pure. In the aftermath, texts arrived, some supportive, some venomous. People online divided into camps, brave kid versus attention seeker. The media liked the simplified headline, Teen Kicks Man Sends Couple to Jail. The layers were flattened and sold as clickbait. Yet, in small ways, life found its soft edges again. The officer who had taken me in kept checking, making sure I had food and clean clothes. Mrs. Lang sent a bouquet that smelled like daisies and paper. My grades stopped slipping. I applied for a part-time job at a bookstore because the smell of new pages steadied me. There was one moment, late at night, when I walked past the now empty living room that held the echo of those slaps. I paused at the photo of Dad on the mantel, his smile a frozen sun. For a second, I let myself imagine the hardest, truest thing, that I had done what I could to protect myself, even if protection looked messy. And I thought, painfully and poorly, about whether I would ever forgive the woman who had raised me and then thrown me into the cold. There were small penalties to pay for my choice, gossip that tasted sour, and a step-family fractured beyond repair. There were also small, unexpected gains. Neighbors who had once been distant, bringing over casseroles, a teacher who now checked in more often, and a legal system that, imperfect and slow, had listened enough to protect me. After the trial, a reporter asked me one question that landed like a stone in my chest. Do you think you'll regret this later? People asked that as if regret was the natural companion of truth. I thought about nights on the officer's couch, about the taste of metal, the smell of grease, the paper cranes. I thought about the way fear had sharpened my bones into a kind of tool. No, I said, not regret. I have scars, and I have hope. The words felt both brave and thin. And then, in the quiet that followed the storm, I understood something that literature rarely taught. Justice is not fireworks in a single shout. It is a series of small, stubborn acts that sometimes move mountains, or sometimes just move you 1 inch forward. I had chosen to move. A week later, I opened a letter from a lawyer representing my father. He had written to say he knew what happened to his kid, and that he was proud I defended myself. The line made the whole thing real and tender in the same breath. I sat on the porch, the smell of fresh bread from a neighbor's visit curling around me, and felt a strange steadiness. The last thing I tell you is simple. If someone grabs you and you kick back, you are not a villain. You are a person deciding in an instant to survive. It is messy, it is loud, and it might not land how the movies say it will, but it is yours. Sometimes defense is the only language left. Shortly after the trial, I started going to therapy through a program the city offered. The counselor, a woman named Rosa with a cardigan that smelled of lavender, taught me that anger and fear are cousins. They sit beside each other at dinner and sometimes swap plates. We worked through what happened in sessions that smelled like peppermint tea and soft chairs. She helped me untangle why my body had reacted the way it did. The old trauma from Dad's arrest had laid a kind of map in my nervous system, and Paul's grab followed a route my body already recognized as danger. School resumed, and routines became anchors. I worked at the bookstore 3 afternoons a week, stacking novels and making change for people who came in rubbing cold hands. The manager, an older man named Mr. Whitaker with a cardigan full of elbow patches, taught me to make Americano coffee while telling me stories about the town. He became one of the small stabilizers in my life, someone whose voice did not judge, only corrected my latte foam. But the ripple effects of the case continued. My stepmom filed an appeal. Paul posted a half-hearted apology on social media that read like a line from a rom-com script, and his friends defended him in the comments. Some of my classmates refused to cross the street to sit by me. Others left notes on my desk. A small faction loved the drama. I learned quickly that people prefer neat stories: villain, hero, redemption. Real life does not always comply. One afternoon, I ran into Paul's sister at the grocery store. She had paint on her hands from a renovation and held a bag of onions like she was guarding them. She said, quietly, "I'm sorry you had to go through that." Her apology was small and human. She handed me a single small jar of homemade jam, a peace offering or simply an attempt at kindness. The jar smelled of quince and sugar. "You could have said nothing," I told her. "You didn't have to come forward." She shrugged. "Some things go better if someone lights them up," she said. Her words were blunt and true. At home, the phone would sometimes buzz with messages from relatives I hadn't talked to in years. An aunt from across the state offered to let me stay with her after graduation if I wanted to escape the town. My father, still in prison, wrote the letters you get to keep, folded in your pocket like small maps. He wrote once, "Pride is heavy, let it go when you can." I tried to make sense of that. There were nights when I still smelled the grease and heard the porch light buzz when I closed my eyes. Those sensations were like photocopies of the original, the edges frayed but unmistakable. I would breathe in through my nose, out through my mouth, like Rosa taught me, and remember that my body had done what was needed to keep it intact. Occasionally, people asked me in the real world, not the courtroom, not the comments, would you confront a parent the way I did? The question was a twin of the one I had once worried over. I would tell them, confrontation is messy, but keeping quiet can calcify into something worse. I had found allies in strange places. A cop who offered a couch, a teacher who left sticky notes, a stranger who left a paper crane. When the town quieted down, I started volunteering at a youth center. There were kids who smelled like bubblegum and of bravado, and I listened when they told their stories. One boy, 12, told me he'd been pushed by a neighbor and didn't know what to do. I remembered how small and huge that feeling was. "You can tell someone," I said. "It's not tattling, it's safety." People still asked me, sometimes with suspicion, "Do you think I'll regret this later?" I learned to answer honestly. Regret is complicated. Some days I regretted the publicness of it. Other days I felt grateful that the world had been made to account for a small wrong. And then, in the quiet stretch after everything, I got a job offer at a small independent publisher in the city. An email that smelled like possibility and deadlines. It required leaving, maybe putting distance between the house with its sagging couch and the paper cranes. I thought about the aunts offer and the bookstore, about Rose's advice to keep making small, sane choices. On the last day I ever walked past that living room, the house seemed smaller but less oppressive. The photo of my father still sat on the mantel, but now there was space around it, like someone had finally cleaned the shelf. I thought about forgiveness, not as a single dramatic act, but as a series of tiny decisions: to accept help, to keep a job, to say no to being treated like a thing. I still get messages, some asking, "What would you have done in my place?" Some ask, "Do you think I should have trusted them less?" Some ask, "Should I have fought back or stayed quiet?" I answer them the same way I answer myself now. Trust your body, gather witnesses, and choose safety over politeness. One evening, months after the verdict, I received a short note slipped under my door. "You were brave." No signature. I ran my fingers over the paper and felt like a different person, not because the past was erased, but because I had chosen to step into my present. The officer who had once offered his couch came by with a thermos of soup that smelled like chicken and rosemary. We talked about small things: the weather, the town, the careless cruelty of people who think they are safe to hurt others. It's been a long road, and there are nights when the fear returns like an old guest at the doorstep. But I have a rhythm now. Work, study, therapy, friends who stay. When someone asks me, in earnest, would you confront a parent the way I did? I tell them, only if you have witnesses, a plan, and a way out. Confrontation without safety is just throwing yourself into the wind. And if you ever wonder whether defense is the only language left, remember the paper cranes, the jam, the little kindnesses that stack up and make a bridge over a broken floorboard. Sometimes that's what justice looks like: messy, stubborn, and human. Final line before the notice. I never wanted to be the storm, but I became the shelter for myself.